Welcome, listeners. So excited to have Jennifer McCollum today. She's the president and CEO at Catalyst. Catalyst, I have followed for years because it is a global nonprofit dedicated to accelerating progress for women at work. She is a recognized leadership expert on a mission to build more inclusive workplaces. Yes, yes, say that again. And the author of the upcoming book, Men at Work, that is coming out this week. And it is a powerful call for men to move beyond passive support towards shared leadership, as they call gender partnership. And she also wrote another book in her own voice, which explores the challenges women face on the path to leadership. And she was also the first female CEO of Linkage, a leadership development firm where she successfully led its acquisition by Sherm. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Julie, thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Well, I have been in awe of Catalyst as an organization and your work and leading it. I know this is a dual effort, Men at Work. So let's start there. The new book, why? Obviously, a little loaded question hit kicking off a Women's History Month, but why are men important in gender partnership?
Well, as you said in your intro, Julie, Catalyst has been focused on accelerating progress for women in the workplace for 65 years. And about 30 years ago, we realized that men play such a critical role. We pioneered the word sponsorship, and men who largely still hold the vast majority of positions of power and influence, whether it's at the CEO level with more than 90% of CEOs globally are men, more than 70% are senior leaders. We simply can't accelerate progress for women without men as active sponsors, allies, and then we've really evolved our research and thinking into the word partnership very specifically because we know that men stand to benefit too from supporting the acceleration of women and creating inclusive workplaces for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as far as the business case, you all don't leave much of a wake. The first three chapters, I think, Jennifer, are about all the data and research you have to support the why for this work. So I thought, in the spirit of good research, I would just highlight a couple of amazing statistics that y'all have. One, women leaders are not staying in corporate roles. Like they are leaving at unprecedented rates, especially women of color. We've seen that from 2025 on. Um, and you cite in the book wanting to advance, but facing headwinds, being overlooked and under-recognized, can totally relate from my corporate experience, and seeking a different culture of work. And it's not just flexibility, right? It's like a different, more inclusive space where I can like really be myself. And this is costly, right? So it's not just like, oh, women are leaving. Oh, it's like, oh, like it's a real problem because losing one employee can cost a S&P 500 company up to $52,000. So I would love for you to weigh in on more on that. Like, why do you think women are leaving and what can men do?
So I love that you're leading with the research, and we've talked for decades about the systemic challenges that women face, and those have actually accelerated, not decelerated, in the past couple years. So as you noted, nearly 500,000 women have left the U.S. workforce in the first half of last year of 2025. Really, our hard-fought progress is very fragile and it's at risk. So when you look at women's representation from the board level into senior leadership levels into the labor market, that has gotten worse over the last couple of years. And when you look at pay inequity, that's also gotten worse over the last couple of years. And so this moving backwards is a real red alert to not only Catalyst, but should be a red alert to all organizations because they need to attract, engage, and retain the half of their workforce that identifies as women. So, what is the role of men specifically? This is where this idea of men in positions of power, influence, and representation not only play a disproportionate role in creating the workforces that we need for all talent to thrive, but they really stand to benefit as well. So that, I think the surprising part of this book was acknowledging in our latest research that 97% of men, the overwhelming majority, actually want to close gender gaps at work. When you break that down a little bit, 76% of them say their organizations must identify areas where women employees are disadvantaged. And 82% say gender equity issues. really need to be understood by managers, and organizations should promote awareness of those issues. So the challenge that we believe is, oh, let me say it a different way. So the challenge isn't that men don't want to help. The challenge is how do we engage them more effectively in this work? And this is where this evolution, I think, was somewhat surprising to Catalyst. They want to help. There are many reasons they're not helping, and maybe they don't fully understand the benefit of what's in it for them.
Yeah, which I think is chapter 3, what's in it for men? What's the old acronym WIFM, what's in it for me? Like what's in it for men? I love that play on words. It's something I've played with over the years with men as allies as well. Yeah, I think Jennifer, for me, it was like this moment doing a lot of women's leadership work and gender equity work. This is like the like 2015, 2016. And I remember when Mark came on the scene. And at the time, it was men advocating for real change. Isn't that what it was? And I know we'll talk about the pivot there and why that's necessary. But I was like, oh my gosh, they have like research on this about engaging men as allies. And that was when I first wrote my book about men as allies. And so Catalyst has just been like a nice, safe, like it's like spot for me. Like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this. Like, you go to women's leadership events and it's like, where are the men? And they just don't like they say one thing and then it seems to me that they do another. Um, Jennifer,
Well,
I'm going to jump.
there are real reasons for that, and it's been well researched. First of all, thank you for calling out what was men advocating real change. We evolved our research from sponsorship to allyship, which a whole lot about, and advocacy. So the critical role that all men could play in helping to drive the acceleration and advancement of women, not just those leaders and sponsors in positions of power and influence. But there are several reasons why we not only changed the name, but then we identified what is preventing men from helping. So let me address the name first. Men Advocating Real Change was started just about a decade ago, and we've been delivering programs all over the world. And we always have had women in those programs because our belief is that when you bring men and women together, you deepen the understanding across gender. So they tend to be 75% men, 25% women, more or less. And it creates this whole new awareness and awakening. Over the years, especially in this environment, we actually got feedback from our supporters globally saying, well, why is it men advocating real change? There are women in the programs themselves. And with the evolution of the political and economic environment over the last couple of years, it actually just last year we said, let's evolve. The real intention of the program is mutual accountability for real change and working across gender to create these inclusive environments. So there were a couple reasons that we changed the name, but it does fit the
Yeah.
intention that we've had over the last decade or so of running Mark.
Yeah, yeah, and I know you want to get to the fears, and the book does a great job of breaking down some of the research-backed fears. But I appreciate that pivot. One, because in this political environment, identity-based politics is a very real threat. Having men or women in something is just an unnecessary, silly spotlight. But it emphasizes back to the mission of we want mutual accountability. And that was something I got feedback on too when I started talking about men as allies. People were like, really, Julie, like we need men to save the day again. And of course, that's not how you or I talk about allyship. It is a true partnership. And so I love this intentional pivot, even if the why for it, as I feel like is sometimes like, "Oh, I don't love that. But the how and the what is necessary to sustain the work. So the elephant in the room, if this is all obvious and 97% of men want to do this, what's holding them back, Jennifer?
And again, what I love about Catalyst is the research-backed approach that we take. And when we dive into the what is holding men back, there are three reasons. And this is again not about men not being well-intentioned, but the first reason is really about what we call ignorance. And ignorance is just, I am not aware. I really don't see it. And I tell the story in the book of my husband and when I challenged him on why are there no women on your sales team at your large financial services organization? At first, he didn't even realize that there weren't, and he didn't really realize why they weren't there. So we'll call that ignorance. The second is apathy, and apathy is I may see that there's a problem, but I'm not really sure what my role is to fix it? Isn't that an HR issue? Isn't that a leadership issue? So an apathy is I see it, but it's not really my issue or my problem. But the third, and I think this is the one that is most significant and what I see the most, is fear. And the fear could be of disrupting the status quo. I kind of like
Mhm.
things the way they are. The fear that we surfaced around the pressure men feel, and we call this the man box in the book, to stay in their kind of stereotypical
Mhm.
group of this is how we are supposed to act. By the way, much like women also have the stereotypical, all of us have a stereotype around how women leaders are supposed to act. They face their own set of stereotypes and are afraid to break out of that box. And then the third, which I think is the hardest, is what is this going to potentially do to harm me? Will it impact my job? Will I lose my job at the expense of a woman, in this case, taking the job? And the answer universally there is no. We don't see that. But I think that fear is real, and we have to help men overcome that.
Yeah, zero sum game. Ever since I've started studying this, it's like, oh, we're promoting more women. We're focused on more women's development. We have a women's ERG, employee resource group. That means like men are losing. And you and I know it's not my pie slice versus your pie slice. Like the pie grows together. We have tons of data to show that there are better outcomes associated with diverse and inclusive leadership teams. And as you point out in the book, 90% of leadership teams are pretty same identity. And we're missing out on all these different perspectives when we don't have the voice of our community and customers and those we hope to serve. So that perspective is so important. One thing I wanted to highlight, one of the research bubbles I just loved, and this is so good because, we're at a point right now where data is kind of becoming less easy to find for obvious reasons. And I love the catalyst data on this. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight if before we go to kind of the how we can engagement as allies is the why for it, just to double click on this. You have data at Catalyst that shows that when you have diversity and inclusion, talent retention goes up. So 20% of employees' desire to stay is linked to their feelings of inclusion. 76% of employees say that organizations should take strides to ensure of diversity and inclusion. So 76% again. Team performance. So inclusion predicts 49% of team problem solving and 18% of innovation, which is like a huge part of problem solving, and innovation is a huge part of corporate America's experiences. And then lastly, reputation and responsibility. Organizations with inclusive business cultures and practices are nearly 58% more likely to improve their reputations. Okay, I just had to get that out, Jennifer, because it's so good.
Well, we're actually going to be continuing the work that you're referencing. So I appreciate you bringing the data to bear. And I do want to say that this data, some of it is, we continue to evolve the data. I'll give you our latest in a moment, but we've been surfacing this data for 30 years as well. So the data around financial outcomes, reputational outcomes, decision-making innovation, Catalyst and many other organizations have surfaced that. I think the question that is more interesting is, with all of this business case data, why aren't we making progress faster?
Right.
So the risk of retreat data that we surfaced in 2025, about 60 days after the executive orders came out, really highlighted to organizations that there is far greater risk of retreating from inclusion
Mhm.
initiatives, programs, breaking down systemic barriers. Is actually the retreat is going to be worse than the resolve. And
Mhm.
so we highlighted the legal, reputational, financial, and talent risk. And what we learned was when you break that down by gender and by generation, it actually gets far worse. In other words, women and Gen Y and Z are going to be more likely to leave
Mhm.
your organization and less likely to purchase from your organization if you're moving away from that inclusion commitment and initiatives, regardless of what you name it and how you finesse it. And we had a lot of recommendations around how organizations should be finessing their programs in alignment with the executive orders.
Oh, I love that, the risk of retreat, because everyone just saw like the risk of doing inclusion, which was confounding to me, but no one was highlighting the risk of exclusion. And
Well,
yeah, I have an
watch this
older,
space. Watch this space because I'm coming back to you in
yeah.
April when we release. It's tentatively called The Reward of Resolve. And that is a next study in partnership with the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and
Nice.
Belonging to really help guide organizations on kind of the 1 to 2 years later, post executive orders and what we need to do to move forward.
Ah, I love the Meltzer Center. So Kenji and David were on the podcast about their new book that came out in February, and I know they're going to be working with you all in partnership as well. Great, great examples of men as allies. So let's focus the conversation on what men can do. And Jennifer, if we could, let's talk about an individual level first. So if you're an individual person, just in an organization that identifies as a man, like what are some ways that you can help as a gender partner? And then part two, like I'd love to talk about like more of the systemic pieces. Like I know you work with leadership teams and bigger programs that help get to some of the systemic problems. But let's start first. Like, hey, I'm just a man working in a company. Like, what could I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's break down what gender partnership is first, because again, I want to I want to make sure this is very practical and tangible. And what I love about the book, to your point, the first half is really around what is the problem, why is it important, why should we all be engaged in solving it. The second half of the book is should be very practical at both the individual and the organizational level around what to do about it. Okay, so gender partner. And I want to just simplify this to it's anyone across gender that believes it is my role to build a more fair and inclusive environment. Number two, I want to engage in this work alongside anyone of any gender. And number three, I want to commit to working toward outcomes that benefit everyone. So, one of the great things about this is it allows men to reorient this to it's actually about men helping men, women helping women, and women helping men and men helping women. So it can
Yeah,
go
all genders.
anywhere.
As we talk, we're not talking binary. As I love the disclaimer you did at the beginning of the book, right? All genders helping each other. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because that has come up a lot. What about non-binary? What about LGBTQ plus? And the truth is, we somewhat artificially, for simplicity and clarity's sake, talk about it as men and women, but we know there and acknowledge there's a full spectrum of gender.
Perfect.
What else? The other thing I love about this is the book is called Men at Work, but we believe that both men, that the whole spectrum of gender should be reading this book because it creates much deeper awareness and understanding across gender. And it's all of our collective role to create these inclusive environments. And this may seem like a simple thing. This is a shift. So when you think about why some men have felt sidelined or blamed or shamed in this work of inclusion, um, this is about inviting them in and helping them see the role we can play across gender and the benefit we can all realize as well. Okay, so let's
And
get
I just want to
into
jump
this.
in there. I noticed in my research last year that that was the biggest thing men were missing as an invitation. Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to be included. They said allies, but I didn't call myself an ally. So it's just like this like disconnect of like I'm not supposed to be there still, and just a like an intentional, consistent invitation to them goes a long way.
And not only an invitation, it's an honoring as well. So, one thing I love about the book is so many of our Catalyst board members and supporter organizations, when we went to them, we said this is an invitation to participate, but also for us to celebrate and honor and hold you up as incredible examples of gender partners and organizations that are creating cultures where everyone can thrive. And what does it actually look like? So, again, a book called Men at Work in this environment was met with a little bit of suspicion, but we wanted to make sure it was an invitation and a celebration.
That's great. That's great. And there's a model. So the second half of the book has a five-step model, Jennifer. Do we want to segue there?
Yeah, let's do that because I think it'll answer your question as well as what does it look like at an individual and an organizational level. And this is where it just gets really practical. So what can we all do first is begin with us. This is
Mhm.
very, inclusion is very individualized work. And what we found in our research was actually men who had experienced some kind of discrimination or harassment or feeling like they were othered or alone were actually much more willing to engage in the work because they could feel what women feel almost daily in their work at any level of the organization. So a specific example that I love is the CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, and he recalls in the book being the only man in a room full of women leaders earlier in his career, and that intense feeling of acknowledging that he was the only, and his discomfort and his sweaty palms before he started speaking. That was his moment of awakening and his moment of awareness that this is what it feels like to be a woman almost every single day. And that's what propelled him to start breaking down those systemic barriers and really driving the Mark work. Chevron being one of our biggest, along with P&G, founders, funders, and purveyors of the Mark work inside their organization.
Love that. Love that story. And it's such a common experience, not a common experience, but is a common segue into allyship or partnership to have that visceral experience of being the only and realizing, oh, shoot, this is happening a lot more often to other folks.
Yeah. And that actually helps propel the when we talked about kind of the ignorance to the apathy to the fear, like breaking those down and becoming a much stronger, advocate for women when you have a sense of what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first step, you really start with yourself and kind of from a place of self-awareness, right? As a in the gender partnership model. You want to walk us through kind of how that works?
Um, Sorry, are we going down to break down what's not working? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, yeah. I think starting with is it begin with you, the first
Oh, yeah,
step of
yeah,
the
yeah.
model? Yeah.
So the begin with you is exactly what we were just talking about. So this is you've got to have some skin in the game, and when you start with reflection, ideally, influenced by experience, either your own experience or an understanding of other experiences, which is what we do in the Mark program. Then it helps your maybe confidence and ability to use your voice and use your influence to make change. So
Mm,
begin with you is the absolutely most important first step. And frankly, it's the hardest first step if you don't have um, gender partners offering their own experiences or a program like Mark to help you see and realize what others are going through.
yeah. Yeah. One of the statistics that I think was in that setup chapter, and something you alluded to, Jennifer, too, is that when men kind of understand that this experience, again, is happening a lot for historically marginalized groups, 75% of men say they don't feel like they can be their true selves when they're expected to kind of stay in that man box or be overly competitive at work. So, just again, to kind of highlight the research of when we connect with our own human experience, then we can kind of be more vulnerable, be more empathetic. Some of the skills that I know Catalyst teaches in their Mark programming about showing up in a really authentic way. But you have to kind of do a little bit of mirror work first to kind of figure out where am I not being able to show up? What would that mean to me? And what would that mean for others? And then you can kind of build into these skills that I know sometimes when I teach this, especially as a woman, the fighting the man box and we have the woman box too, we have all the gender boxes. This is one of the headwinds I face sometimes as a facilitator is like, Julie, you realize this is like really counter to our stereotypes, norms in our culture, and just kind of how we look at masculinity in America and globally too. So I'm just curious, Jennifer,
Yeah.
when that comes up in the training setting or one-on-one conversations, like what are some ways to kind of navigate that real challenge?
So I experienced the Mark program when I started as the CEO of Catalyst. It was in August of 2024, and I had never heard the word man box before. And to my awakening, even as a woman, to the challenges that men face happened in that room when men started to open up about, um, and we call it in our research, the masculine anxieties of
Yeah.
feeling like they have to conform to a very specific, unemotional, stoic, competitive persona, and that most of them don't feel comfortable in that, certainly not all the time. And so that was kind of an awakening for me as a woman to understand that, well, wait a minute, we're really focused on men understanding what women face at work. As a true gender partner, I need to understand what they're facing as well.
Mhm.
And so this ability to share my experiences in the workplace, your experiences in the workplace, and have a deeper appreciation and sense for actually these stereotypical norms, what we call these, these rigid um, gender norms that we all hold, actually aren't serving anyone. They're not serving women, nor are they serving men.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. It's a both and experience. I love what that research highlights. I wanted to segue to one of the roles that I know that Catalyst has helped kind of create, right? The role of sponsorship, Jennifer. Because I see this as a really pivotal role for men as allies or as gender partners. We are over mentored and under sponsored. A lot of our data shows that. And so mentorship and sponsorship are different. I think Brene Myers talks about this best as like mentors talk to you, sponsors talk about you. As far as like mark programming goes and what you see at Catalyst, like why, leading question, why is sponsorship critical and how is this like evolving as we think about men as partners in this work?
Yeah, and actually, sponsorship is at great risk right now because as you look at the post-executive order landscape and this, kind of the fear around formal sponsorship programs really, targeting any one intersection, we know from 30 years ago at the research that we started with sponsorship was that because men hold the vast majority of positions of power, as we've already talked about, they also hold the greatest opportunity to pull women in, open the door and make sure that women are walking through that door and being supported on the other side. I mean, the glass cliff is something we can also talk about, being put in a role and supported to succeed in that role. So we never want to negate the critical role that men play as sponsors as long as they continue to be in the vast majority of leadership positions. Mentorship, to your point, is different as well. We can all be mentors to each other if we have
Yeah.
experiences that can lead the way to to mentor at any level. They can be formal, they can be informal. Sponsorship is much harder. You have to earn a sponsorship. Um, so the original question was around why this is at risk in this environment.
Yeah.
Why? We do know that women are now receiving less sponsorship, especially women who are working from home. This was the latest McKinsey and
Mhm.
Lean In study.
Mhm.
Flexibility actually creates less sponsorship for women, but equal sponsorship for men, less promotions for women, equal promotions for men. So there's a real disparity and bias between men and women as it relates to sponsorship and working flexibly. And those are two incredibly important things for the continued advancement of women, as well as childcare. We can talk about that separately. That was the number one thing that came up in our research. But
Of course. Yeah, I think, yeah, just to build off of that, Jennifer, I appreciate this disparity research and highlighting Lean In's Women in the Workplace report. I got to interview Rachel Thomas when that report came out, and I know everyone kind of lasered in on the ambition gap, which is more of a system problem than an individual problem. So we could go there, but back to, sponsorship and the risk. It's always been a risk. I mean, you're putting career collateral on the line. And if you sponsor somebody, put their name in the hat for a position, a stretch assignment, you are associating yourself with this person. And if they don't perform, it does come back on you. Whereas mentorship is a little less risky. It's like, well, I told her to do that, but she didn't do it the way I told her to. And you can kind of have some cover on that. So I'm kind of just in wrapping up this conversation, kind of thinking about what's next. And maybe how about this? Like if you had a magic wand, Jennifer, and everyone read Men at Work and everyone was familiar with this important research and the services that Catalyst offers, like what would be ideal like for organizations? Like what would be the ideal kind of things that they would be doing to make sure that they're practicing like true inclusion and gender partnership?
and maybe to answer that question, I'll do a hot walk through the next four B's. So we started with the Begin With You framework. My vision 5 years from now is that men have overcome that ignorance and apathy and fear. But most importantly, they're able to see, and we're collectively able to see what is not working and why. What do we all stand to gain from it? And when we
Mhm.
can bridge the gender gap and bring more humanity to work, we not only see the organizational performance outcomes and the team outcomes, that we individually are also seeing better outcomes for our personal and professional lives. So let me get super, so I'll pause there and get super tangible for a moment. Um, you have said many, many times in this conversation that these are systemic barriers, and they absolutely are. We have to break down what's not working related to talent acquisition processes, or promotion processes, or flexible workplace policies. And sometimes those things are hard to do if you're not in those right positions. What we can all do is break down what's not working from a leadership and a cultural perspective from wherever we sit in the organization. And that's starting to call out these misguided assumptions, these outdated leadership norms and stereotypes.
Mhm.
Um, and then I'd
Yeah.
also like to see men really start to define this workplace integration, this personal professional integration, not as a women's issue, but as a workplace issue. And how can we all be much more vocal about our needs to care for children and home and elders, and take time to care for ourselves, and be much more vocal and visible about that. And that does require breaking down the man box and being a bit more vulnerable, so that we can see these are not women's issues, these are workplace issues.
Yeah, I love the part in the book about a man being able to spend more time with his kiddos as a result of his own advocacy. That was a really cool story. And I know Brad Johnson and Dave Smith, who helped endorse the book, and I know have been partners with Catalyst, have a new book coming out this summer. I can't wait to get my hands on about some of that, how caregiving for men actually helps their leadership performance too. So it's just, again, more wise for this.
You know everybody. We're also starting to work with Equimundo as well, and Gary's work. So hopefully there's this convergence, and in this time, and I would say this is really coming out now, really in only the last year or two. This real focus on boys and men. Like
Mhm.
Catalyst never wants to take the focus away from the real challenges that women face in the workplace, but we also need to acknowledge that boys and men are struggling too, and they bring those struggles equally into the workplace. So when you look at suicide rates, depression rates, the fact that 15% of men say they have not one close personal relationship, they bring all that into the workplace. And as the majority of people in leadership positions, we need healthy men driving healthy organizations, and we need women partnering with men and men partnering with women to do that.
I love that. That is really illuminating, and I think a cause we should all care about. No one should feel loneliness and isolation, and certainly there's no way you could do your best work if you're feeling disconnected, and not a part of the organization. So many whys for this. I love the vision of success. I love the B's that you walked through, Jennifer, to help us learn how to be better allies for one another. And just wrapping up today, tell us more about how to follow Catalyst's latest research, how to get the book Men at Work.
The Minute Workbook is available right now anywhere that you get your books. We're so excited about the first release in 33 years. You can also go to catalyst.org and get so much more information, not only about the book, but also about gender partnership and very specific guidance on how all of us can be gender partners for each other. And third, become a Catalyst supporter with your organization, so that we can bring deeper content like our Mark, mutual accountability, real change work, or keynotes, things that we can do to really kind of bring awareness, inspiration, and actionable guidance to all leaders at all levels in your organization.
Hmm. Well, this has been a full circle moment for me. I stumbled upon Catalyst way in the early days of my business, and it just so many of the outcomes-based research really deeply affected me and my will for continuing to do this work. So I'm so thankful, Jennifer, for your time and the great work that you and Catalyst do.
Thank you so much, Julie. We'll talk soon when the next piece of research comes out.
I can't wait.